Assalamu alaikum, everyone. And thank you for joining us today. My name is Yasmin, and we are here for our first episode of Nisa Talks, which is going to be, inshallah, a launch of one of our newest products, Nisa Learning. And the goal with Nisa Learning, inshallah, is to build healthy communities through healthy families. We want to start with the very foundation of a community, which is the homes and the families that make it up. And what we want to do is work with our families and our communities to build healthier relationships, healthier ways of communicating, and healthier habits that can, inshallah, lead to less need for the services that we have on the Nisa home side or the Nisa helpline side, or any other services for that matter, inshallah. So with that, I wanted to, inshallah, introduce our panel here. We have Sheikh Abdullah Misra joining us from the GTA, the Greater Toronto Area. And then we have Dr. Farah Islam, who is a mental health researcher. And then we have Dr. Altaf Husain, who's the VP at Yaqeen Institute for Islamic Research. My first question to you all is, when we do talk about healthy families, what does that mean to you? How would you define a healthy family? And maybe also mentioning, what role does spirituality or faith play in maintaining and establishing a healthy family?
You know, I love that question. What it reminded me of was that beautiful hadith where our mother Aisha radiallahu anha was asked, about our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and what he was like when he was in the home. And she said that our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam would busy himself in the service of everyone in the home and his family. And then when he would hear the call to prayer, he would go up and go to prayer, go to the masjid, subhanAllah. And I think that's so beautiful about what family is and how healthy those dynamics or those relationships are supposed to be. At the beginning, or right at the top, or the central core is our relationship or our connection with our Rabb, our Creator, subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then outside of that is that we spend our time in the service of our family. And I thought that's such a beautiful way to talk about how important our family is, and how those connections and those dynamics, those relationships are supposed to be in a healthy home.
I would just say that in terms of family, love, good character, and respect are the most important components, I think, of a happy family and of a healthy home. We often think that as Muslims, and especially in my role, I'm expected to say that, well, religion, it has to be religion that's going to be the deciding factor. But the reality is that non-Muslims have healthy homes too. There are people of all different religious types. So does religion play a role in that healthy home? Definitely, spirituality does. But it's the aspect of our deen that helps to emphasize those common human values of respecting each other. And this doesn't only mean children respecting their parents, but it means parents respecting each other, respecting boundaries between each other, communicating with each other, love, and helping each other. And this is where, as our sister said, it's the prophetic character aspect of our faith that most importantly impacts families. When we speak about religion, we often think it's adherence to rules or to certain identity markers, and it's not the case. It really goes back to things that all human beings can appreciate, and the aspects of the Sunnah which stand out in terms of behavior and how you treat other people.
For me, I've noticed, and I think this response could have been different in each sort of generation or whatever trends are occurring. But I find nowadays, healthy or happy family is one where the roles and responsibilities of each person in the family have been understood, internalized, and perhaps reflected or emulated, or have seen emulated in a model, either if there was their own parents or grandmother and grandfather or an uncle and aunt, somewhere where the balance showed up in an equitable way, and there was no sense of either lack of fulfillment because someone wasn't doing what they were supposed to be doing. And so the reality is that we are all busy, but if that balance can be there, I find that most of the time people can work through other aspects of the marriage depending on of the family personalities, of children, personalities of the spouse, the husband and wife, and so forth. So I would emphasize, in addition to what has been said, just a very clear sense of Islamic and a mindset about roles and responsibilities within the marriage itself and the family itself.
Okay. I actually have a question about that later, so we'll come back to that question too. Because maybe I'll ask it now, just since that was mentioned. And this was someone that had given us feedback around this idea of like roles and responsibilities, that a lot of times it ends up becoming very transactional, that this is my job, this is your job, and that's it. Like, this is, what we decided from day one of our marriage, and that's it. Like, it's set in stone. And it really becomes like, well, your job is this, my job is this. Like, I guess, how do you kind of balance between having those roles and responsibilities, but also making sure that they are responsive to each individual family and that family situation, or maybe changing situations, or also not kind of making it super transactional in that way, because you did this, I must do this, and limiting that whole relationship, instead of instead of like really being able to understand each other. And I think I really like that you mentioned in an equitable way. How is it that we can find that balance?
I can quickly just say that there is now it's a PDF online by Dr. Jamal Badawi, Hafidhullah, on gender equity in Islam. So I think it will help, folks who want to sort of refer to it. But where I was going with it is that, and based on your question, we had a situation where a young brother was very, very brilliant in computer science, had just, worked his way through to establish a career. At least he was starting off in his career. They got married, and subhanAllah, soon after the marriage, he was diagnosed with some condition that literally caused his arms to be in so much pain that he couldn't type. And essentially, the livelihood, the income, the career was all based on this idea of coding and being on the computer or the laptop, wherever. So what would a person do? Because we always assume the ideal, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, will just leave things as is. So I said this, I would do this, you said you would do this, but circumstances change. And in this case, they had to figure out how to now earn a living together, be husband and wife, and literally be the husband who could not now use the arms for until some surgery and other circumstances. So this is the question I would ask, and I think my colleagues would add a different dimension to it. Is that you have to look at the organic, the sort of the evolving nature of health, of mindset, of mental health, of outlook, of circumstances of the economy, of layoffs, of all kinds of parents suddenly becoming ill and shifting responsibilities depending on whose parents they are. So many factors can come into play. Again, going back to, if the goal is to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through this marriage and through this relationship, then what am I willing to do and put aside what I agreed to do, and what adjusting the circumstances, inshallah.
I think that to add to what was said, we are living in a time of flux between traditionalism, traditional values, and modernity. We have different values being informed by different cultures coming together. And just as discourses in our countries develop as to what are the roles and responsibilities of different different family members, for example, whether it's within marriage or children to parents, parents to children, and so on and so forth. The thing is that we need to have these discussions, I think, in an open way within families, within marriages, within families, because when there is a difference of how people see what it means to be in a family, you often get this type of discord that comes just from the flux and the changing nature of society. So perhaps there was a greater understanding about when you talk about roles and responsibilities. So even though it could have been transactional as the skeleton, the meat on the bones, so to speak, was, as Dr. Altaf was saying, a type of understanding and a type of love and consideration for the other person, right? So that even if those roles and that transactional skeleton is not purely upheld, then there's the consideration takes over. The issue becomes when the underlying format of the family is up in question in modernity, and when that's being contested by different members of the family. And so when that's being contested, there has to be, I think, an honest and open dialogue, and realizing as well, especially for those who see themselves as heads of the household, or something like that, that people have a voice, children will have a voice. And I think coming to an understanding where everyone is comfortable, or at least they can all accept what the role that they are expected to play, but also that what they want to play in a family. I think it's a lot easier when everyone is on the same page in terms of what cultural norms are we following, what understanding is there, and from there, yes, our good character and our love and consideration will make this so it's not just a raw transactional event like a work setting, but a family is where the difference between family and work is that family, you have love, you have commitment, you have duty, consideration, right? So it goes above and beyond that transactional aspect. But there has to be, I think, a ground level of agreement as to, well, what is this marriage going to look like? Because someone could be coming in with one understanding and another person with another understanding.
Growing up, I had this great family doctor, those family doctors who give life advice. So Dr. Khan, I remember one day she said, you get married to nurture each other. And I thought that was such a beautiful way to talk about marriage. And it's this idea of, life is going to come at you. It's going to throw, subhanAllah, I think, right? But we're going to be hit with different hardships or different trials in life. And so this idea of growing together, of taking care of each other, of rolling with those punches, whatever, life happens to hit us with at that time. Before, soon after I gave birth to our child, I got very sick. I was in the hospital for a month, alhamdulillah. And it was my husband who stepped in, took care of our baby. All the grandparents stepped in to come in and to take care as well. It's this idea of that family coming together to take care of each other, nurture each other where they need to be taken care of, beyond even just the single nuclear family, but the community at large, and then the greater extended family as well, all coming to raise each other up, hold each other up, whatever we do fall apart. And I think that's such a beautiful way to think about and consider family, that it is a dynamic process of growth that will continue to change as we go along, inshallah.
I mean, that segues perfectly into my next question. And I think you might have already touched on it, but from an Islamic perspective, or even from just a regular, all of you have a background in psychology and counseling also. Why is it important that our homes and our families are healthy? Like, what impact does that have on our community?
Typically, I find myself saying a healthy family, healthy community, just because what is a community? It is a connection or a mix of all of these families that come together. And if they're either meeting up at an Islamic center or a community center or some other space, the health of each of those families will impact all of the others. And the best example I can give in this case is, for example, we have Islamic schools, and sometimes what happens is there's a student who is in public schools, and for whatever reason the parents are really dissatisfied with either the performance, behavior, or something, and they go, "That's it. We're going to put you in Islamic school." And on the other side, the principal, the school counselors, the teachers, they're like, "What just happened?" Right? One child coming in, one student coming in with a lot of unresolved issues, unprocessed issues, trauma, whatever it is that was causing them to behave that way. So we need to think through and say, okay, what are we doing to ensure every family has some access, at least to the resources, to know that not every family is perfect. And in an age of social media and Instagram, where it looks like every family is perfect from the pictures and the cute videos that are posted, in reality, it took 70 tries, let's say, for that one pose, and then they got it done, but nobody talks about the 69 tries before the 70th one worked. And so we're hoping that it's also a great place for commiserating, for sharing best practices, and so forth, and that's why the healthy family in the community would be, a starting point.
Basically, the individual communities are made obviously of families and individuals, right? It goes back to the individual. An individual is shaped largely by their childhood, by the way they grew up, what they saw, the dynamics in a family. So when we talk about communities, they're only as good as the people that make them up. And if the people that make them up have problems or issues that they cannot resolve, or issues that stay with them, and the community is not able to have enough um, functional relationships and healthy relationships and connections between these individuals, then the issues that happen within family will end up coming out maybe in later years. It could be in for the youth, it comes out very, very quickly. But even in marriages, even later on in life, it does come out. And so us thinking that communities, for example, the way that a board is runs a masjid, or the way that an organization runs, or the way that people cooperate within a community, this idea that it has nothing to do with family, or that you can do one or the other, is not accurate, because our psyches are shaped by our earliest interactions and our most private and personal interactions. When there's a culture of kind of like a shame culture, and you keep everything under wraps. In some cultures, you look perfect on the outside as a family, but on the inside, you're suffering. And same thing with communities. What we found was that it reveals the inside of those communities, or the inside of those families reveals a lot of problems. And I think now we're living in a time where that kind of veneer of perfection that, as Dr. Altaf mentioned on Instagram, people are more comfortable with opening that up to getting help. So communities are impacted by families, but the positive aspect of all of that is that at least we have these conversations going on how we can make families healthier. For the first time, we can actually have resources where people can do that. And so we expect that the community will also be, as a result, a healthier community if people have resources to be a healthier and happier family.
And just to add to that, it's brilliantly said, mashallah, but the idea that, we talk about the family being the unit, the building block of our ummah. So all the things that happen within a family really do lay that foundation and kind of map the architecture with which a child who then grows up to be an adult goes on to contribute to his or her community. So the ways in which communication happened within the home, or the ways in which that child, children are sponges, they absorb and observe everything that we do. So the ways in which they saw their mother treat their father, or their father treat their mother, or the dynamics between parents and children, or between children and elders, etc., really does absolutely inform how that child, or that then young adult and adult, grows on to communicate and to contribute to their own community, within their family, within their workplace, within their relationships, within all the dynamics, also within how they communicate with themselves, right? Their self-talk is very much so informed by how people spoke to them as a child. So all of that is so important to think about. So when we're talking about how to create a healthier community by going into the homes and creating healthier homes with healthier communication, I think that's the brilliant and the one of the best ways to do that, inshallah.
Yeah. And I think Dr. Altaf had mentioned this earlier too, that like we practice what we learn and what we see from others around us, like you said, right? When I see, my parents acting in a certain way, or my aunts, my uncles, my grandparents, that's what I internalize to be how I should act. And we see this especially with abuse. Unfortunately, children that grow up in households where they witness abuse, they're more likely to end up either experiencing the abuse when they grow up, or being abusers when they grow up. So it's, you can't argue with, evidence like that it really does shape the way you approach everything in life around you, and the way that you will approach your relationships in the future. So it starts from that very, very early point. But I guess my follow-up question to that is then, and Sheikh Abdullah kind of mentioned this, then what is the responsibility for the community to build those healthy relationships too, like to establish those healthy families? Because I think on the one side, we assume, for many families, they assume, okay, if I get my children involved in the community, then I'm making sure that they're not, involved in anything bad, or, I'm just being at the masjid, problem solved. I'm sure that's a big part of it. Inshallah, I hope that does contribute to making sure the children are in healthier spaces. But I also wonder, we see this a lot of times, that we don't want to have these conversations in the community, that, it's easier to talk about, things that are not as controversial controversial or as problematic, or people are not prepared to have these difficult conversations. And abuse is one of them, but there's drugs, there's divorce, there's just so many problems, I guess, that plague communities, whether they're Muslim or not. It's not just a Muslim issue. So what becomes the role of the community in making sure that we can establish those healthy families and healthy homes?
I think because communities are there, it's in their interest to ensure their survival and the thriving of the community. This is why we're even having this discussion, right? Because we're all connected, not through family, but we're connected as a common Muslim community, even though we're from slightly different locations. And I think that because we have that interest to see the community do well, we realize, wait a second, we can't be a healthy, thriving, functioning, and surviving community, a community that goes on and is able to carry through generations the legacy of being together and of our deen. So this is what actually makes us go into the families, because when you don't see members of your community doing well, or you hear different things are happening with them, or they're not showing up where you want them to come out as families, then you have to start looking into the family unit and saying, well, what can we do to improve the situation? Because you can say we are a big community, but if we're not addressing the needs of, let's say, people who are stuck in domestic violence, or people who have mental health challenges within families, then as a community, we're not actually taking the responsibility of what it means to take care of the members of that collective. And so definitely a look into family is the most important thing. And actually, even before that, is a look into the individual themselves and how they're feeling. So it all goes back to the individual and how they're functioning within the various relationships that they have. And that lies at the heart of making sure, especially in a time when people are ready to just go on their screens and ignore everyone, stay home and watch Netflix. If we want to have this idea of a community, then we're going to have to start looking at the individual and meeting them where they are and making sure that their needs are fulfilled, so they want to come out and identify and be as part of a larger purpose and cause.
Yeah, that's very true. That, we were talking about families, but we also have to talk about the individuals within that family. Like, what are we doing to address their individual needs? Because that's what's causing either the good things in the family or the problems in the family. It comes back to their individual needs and whether they're met.
So no, the role of a community is so vital, subhanAllah, for the thriving of the Muslim family, right? A healthy family just by itself cannot thrive in isolation, right? They do live within this greater community. So having a masjid community, having an imam who speaks to the difficulties or the challenges and the successes of that particular community, of what your family is actually facing, all of that relevance, that relatability, all of that needs to be there for each family to be able to really thrive. And there's so much a part of what being a Muslim is to contribute and to give back to not to only to your family, but to your greater ummah, to your greater community, to your neighbors. And having that space, creating those healthy communities where you do have this sense of responsibility, of duty, of honor, of giving back and feeling a part of that greater sense of belonging is such a vital and important part of what it is to be in a healthy home or in a healthy family.
And just to add to what's been said, I think I'm thinking a lot more lately about structures and spaces. So I think in many ways while maintaining a very high level of Islamic etiquette and adab about gender interactions and so forth, sometimes we've created such almost like islands where the fathers hang out or the children are hanging out, where the women and mothers are. And I think in again with emphasis on the Islamic etiquette and so forth, with giving and providing enough sort of a framework for interaction, it would be helpful for families to be seen together. So in community functions, I often tell people, it's okay if you have sections where families can sit at the community dinner, and that's them. And so others can see them interacting, others can see them, in real life, and see the non-Instagram, sort of a family being, presenting itself. And that will help us, I think, in the long run, to also prepare, especially our boys into men, to be able to see what does it mean to to be in society and to be modest. What we put a lot of emphasis on the young girls and women about modesty in these community settings, but the community could model a great way of saying, this is how you conduct yourself. This is how your lowering of the eyes is practically done, of your gaze is practically done. This is how you interact when, like, I'm a husband and a father. If I greet the wife or the of another family, my sons need to see me greet that the other family, and see how I can conduct myself with proper etiquette, and see that unfold in a healthy way. So I think we do have just that last function is the modeling function in spaces and structures that can allow for this level of interaction, again with the emphasis on very pristine sort of carrying out of, and you might also say even the mistakes that are made. When someone does by mistake speak in a certain way, or hopefully it's by mistake, and or somebody is turned off by a particular way of approaching the opposite gender or another member of the family, then that can give rise for a discussion. Say, I just so we know, I think they must have been upset. So, but it's not a good way. It's not nice to speak to someone this way or to be harsh, and it becomes learning. As a learning, a point without blaming and without necessarily casting judgment. So, all of these things I think should be happening in a community, so that people can see if you do mess up, how do you correct yourself, and how do you generally try to lead yourself by the ideals of the sort of the prophetic etiquette, of being, and I might just add the example of the Prophet ﷺ when he was walking with his wife Safiya, radiallahu ta'ala anha. It could be that someone comes into a gathering and they just happen to be near one another or something, and someone is is suspicious of something, or before any doubts you can say, for example, he said innaha Safiya, that this is my wife, because she was covered. They didn't know, they were walking in somewhat darkness, and the companions were around. He wanted to declare it before any doubt, anything sets in. This is who she is. So it could be you bring a co-worker to the gathering of the community, and everybody's like, hey, who is that? Well, you say it, you present it. You say, this is a co-worker interested in Islam. I'm just going to introduce her to the other sisters, and so I brought her here. I'm the father, I'm the husband, so people know where the limits are, what the interaction looks like, inshallah.
I think those are brilliant points. I think for I remember I remember being in situations where you literally have like each group completely isolated in terms of like structure wise, like in different rooms, and there is none of that interaction. And I do wonder, like a lot of maybe parents wonder about like, how are my kids going to get married? Even like that's also something that comes up. Like there's zero interaction or zero ability to see what's out there, and then we expect them to somehow be able to get married or be able to interact, and it becomes very, very challenging. So I think that's a very good point. Any other points to add to that one? I think my follow-up question to that is, the one criticism a lot of times we get is that when we start to talk about these things, we're told, well, we're airing the dirty laundry, or like these are private affairs that they should not be, discussed so openly, maybe in certain places. And it makes sense from a, obviously we're not saying we need to, tell this family did that and this family did that, but the issues that are happening, how can we maintain the privacy and the sanctity of those relationships, while also being able to address this and not be told like, these are private matters.
So I think this idea of airing the dirty laundry or not, it comes down to somewhat of a cultural difference as well, and it's a kind of a interaction between how traditionally things were dealt with in societies, and how in modern times, in modern society, things have the approach that has been taken. And this is where it's a balance in between the two of them. Traditional societies, many of them, many times, things would be covered up as a way of, if you didn't have resources to deal with those problems, number one, then there wouldn't be any point in opening them up. And so their way of not having it impact the wider society would be to cover up those problems, whether it's the individual not speaking about their mental health challenges, whether it's about couples not revealing their problems to their children, families not revealing their problems to other families, and communities not talking about the issues that are happening on a more on a leadership level, for example, or things like that. That obviously comes to a head in modernity when this idea of individual responsibility, justice, these concepts are taken to a level where no, every single thing that happens wrong has to be solved, and there's a great benefit in it. Of course, that's why people decide to go that way. But at the same time, there is a point when people say about airing the dirty laundry, because it does tend to influence and impact the way that others see what's happening in the society. So it is a double-edged sword, and we have to admit that neither is this cultural view of like keep everything covered up healthy. It's not good and healthy, especially in places and times when people will have choices to make, and they will simply choose to go away from the systems that they feel, or communities or family units that they feel were not good for them. And then there's a difference between, as you said, cancel culture, calling out, start to name names of families that are doing certain things, and bad husbands and bad wives, and not giving people a chance to redeem themselves and be able to come back into a community. You can't do that if you've just torn a person's self-concept completely down. And so there has to be an aspect of confidentiality, respect, discreet help. And I think our Islamic values do go a long way to ensuring that type of preservation of a person's reputation or a person's feelings can be done without ignoring the very real fact that we do need to get into these issues. And sometimes they will have to be spoken about, and it's not always going to look good. But we have to trust that sometimes bringing out these issues and solving them is actually for the greater good of the community in the long run. It is healthier and it is better, because the entire point is not to exile and castigate. It's rather to bring people back in a healthier manner.
And our Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, I mean, he himself never shied away from difficult or hard conversations, right? He came into a society, into a political, sociocultural context where they buried little girls. And I'm sure people would have rather, not have him, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, speak out on that grave injustice, but he did. Right. For example, or when the women of the Ansar asked about the wet dreams, right? They were unafraid of asking these very difficult questions, or questions maybe people would rather, shove under a rug and pretend they don't exist. But our Prophet ﷺ said, may Allah bless the women of Ansar, because they were bold. They asked those questions that needed to be asked, whether that was about the rights of little girls, or about sexual health, or different dynamics or things in the society that needed to be reformed. And it isn't about calling people out or exposing individuals, but it is about our faith for sure demands that we speak out against any injustices, oppression, difficulties, or challenges that we are seeing within our ummah or within our families, and working in a very constructive way to help and to nurture families so they can get to a place where they can whether heal from trauma or get to a healthy place where they can thrive and to grow and nurture each other, get back to that place where they can be together.
Yeah, I think it's a very important point and this relates back to your question, your point earlier, Dr. Altaf, about how, we need to have opportunities where we can learn and see each other. Maybe there are families that haven't been taught these things, haven't been in these situations. There are families maybe that the father's not there or the mother's not there. How do they learn without having those opportunities? And how do we, as, community members, if maybe, a family doesn't have a boy, and then, a child does have a boy in that family or something like that, like how else do you learn and get those answers to your questions if you have no avenue or no way of feeling safe to approach your community and the people in your community that are trusted and that can give you the right answer? Because what ends up happening is we'll go on the internet, we'll go on Google and try to find those answers, and we know the rabbit hole that people can go down in those situations, unfortunately. So I think that's very important, that this is a safety that community provides, that it gives you those opportunities to learn and answer questions in a safe and educated environment.
Mm-hmm.
And on that note, we are speaking of the community as a sort of vast entity, and clearly within the community are some fairly, informed and indigenous, if you will, leaders. So the imam, the trusted elders of the community, and so to this notion of rightful grievances, and then this idea of airing the dirty laundry. The challenge, I think, has been the balance between that which is life threatening and that which is, in the domestic violence, interpersonal violence literature, it often says that a woman especially, may attempt 6 to 7 times to leave an abusive relationship before finally leaving. So it could be that it was the first 4 or 5 reasons were community and elders and in-laws and family just saying, it's fine, you can work through it, bear with it, it's a test, it's whatever. It's a 6 or 7 time. Now the dysfunction in that is that it shouldn't take 6 or 7 times and all of the other trauma that has occurred in between. But at the same time, are we training and are we helping our imams and mashayikh, our resident scholars, and both the sheikhas and the sheikhs, the shuyukh, to be able to say, look, here are some clear warning signs of dysfunction, and here's where it is not helpful to say because the person is a board member of the perpetrator is the board member of the masjid, we're going to have to handle it differently than we would if it was someone we didn't know or someone in the community with a lesser status. And that comes from, and I'm glad Nisa Foundation and other organizations are in these spaces, because once we can tackle that, then the idea of airing dirty laundry does not become the paramount concern. The paramount concern is the safeguarding of the individuals in that family, whether it is children who are in harm's way, or the mother, or the father, or an elder. Elder abuse is on the rise as well within at least the American context. And so it could be that we are just looking past all these things because everyone assumes that the Quranic injunction of treating my parents and giving them unconditional love and respect and so forth is directly this idea of speaking about the abuse that they are perpetrating is in direct contradiction or violation of that principle of unconditional love and unconditional respect. It isn't. It could be a temporary halt just to bring things back to balance and say, look, things have gotten so out of control. This is the same loving, nurturing husband, wife, mother, father, whatever. Something has gone wrong. I just want someone to know in a confidential way so that something can be done about it before much more regrettable things happen and much more harm occurs. So we need to do that. We need to have these frank conversations, and I am seeing improvement in that. I'm seeing people who are more likely to go to the imam or a local counselor, or at least give out some signals that something is not right, whereas on the surface it may appear to be right. So inshallah, those could be additional sort of modules and training components added to a regular sort of training of imams and mashayikh and the sheikhs to serve the community.
Inshallah. And in addition to that, I mean that 100%. Also how to respond when someone does come up and does come to you with whether it's a concern of a personal issue. I think I've noticed this happen unfortunately several times, where people reach out to us and tell us, this speaker or this imam or this board member, we know that they're abusive, or they have done this or they have done that, but when they bring it up, it's not believed, unfortunately, or they're told, like, show us the proof, which is often not possible without, also, causing more harm or potentially, impacting their safety. So yeah, even responses and conversations around that, and it's something that's been unfortunately coming to. I sorry, this is where my brain went, because it's something that has been coming up for me at least multiple times in the past couple of months, where I've had multiple sisters reach out, and the same response has been given, that without proof we can't do anything. So training around that would be great, inshallah, one day. Inshallah, part of Nisa Learning. It is definitely on our radar. I know it's something that Peaceful Families does, and I know we're hoping to bring that to Canada, inshallah. But kind of to segue into, you kind of mentioned the boys and the men, and that's a big part of what we're hoping to launch. We're actually working with Sheikh Abdullah on this. It's a program called Raising Rijaal, and the goal of the program is to focus on the boys in our community and focus on improving and supporting them, because I think it's I don't want to say it as such a big drastic statement, but I think it's safe to say that men and boys are struggling right now. There's a mental health crisis that is impacting men and boys. There's a social popular culture issue that's happening around masculinity, and we want to go back to, we believe, and you can give me your input, but I believe if we do go back to the real prophetic teachings, we are able to address all of these issues, because the Prophet ﷺ was the perfect example when it came to masculinity and when it came to being a man and raising also boys. Even though he didn't have his own boys, he raised many other boys in the community, which is also, again, when we talk about community and family, like that whole dynamic, right? Even when we talk about, mothers, the aspect of, now it's everyone's, to each his own, like in the very Western culture, unfortunately, has become very individualistic, that you only raise your family, you only raise your kids, you can't really, I remember growing up, I would go to people's houses and, I'd spend time outside. My parents wouldn't be there all the time. And now I look at my kids, when we take them to someone's house, we're there. When someone's kids come to our house, they're there. Like we're always, we don't give that opportunity for the rest of the community to be part of that upbringing. And I understand that the challenges of we don't have the family. Like I don't have my family to be able to do that. But I wonder how this impacts then our boys and how it's impacting us as a community as a result. Sorry, I'm obviously not very succinct with my questions. A lot to say. So, but the question here being that when we start talking about boys and the role that boys and men play in the well-being of society, what does that mean?
Well, I can say, because we're in spaces now where this has become a concern. So the two Ibadullah, Sheikh Abdullah Misra, and then on the other side, Sheikh Abdullah Uduro. So we are talking about Raising Rijaal program here, and Yaqeen Institute, we just launched the masculinity series, precisely focusing on, and that's Sheikh Abdullah Uduro, and then Sheikh Abdullah Misra is doing the Raising Rijaal. So here, I think it's finally come to a point where people have said, instead of saying we're overreacting if we just talk about the boys, we should just start doing something. And I think that something comes down to looking around and seeing and saying to ourselves, we internalize so much of what's happening in contemporary society, not just the Muslim society, but all of the forces that exist within, popular culture and so forth. So we are now actually doing what we should have been doing from the get-go, from the emergence of immigrant Islam in America, taking notes from the history of the African American Muslim experience, where that was a rites of passage. Programs for boys were very much a part of what it meant to be a Muslim. So somehow we came away from that. We're going back to it, but then we're also going back to our own tradition, our own prophetic tradition, where the himma of Umar ibn Khattab and the haya of Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala anhuma, this should have been a part of our conversation to begin with. And so I think in addressing this, we are hoping not to do like an overcorrection whereby the other gender feels completely disconnected, marginalized, alienated, or blamed, and going this way so that it becomes like we're basically to the point of just catering only to the boys. And that balance has to be there. And we've mentioned balance, throughout today's comments, that we did. We emulated what was happening in the 60s and 70s in mostly Western society, whereby the focus was on, hey, we've neglected our girls, and we need to really help them establish themselves, get a career, advance in whatever topic, whatever knowledge area they want to do it. And it showed up in our masjid programming. It showed up in our youth programming. And so we're training them because they're the next generation of mothers. Well, who were they going to marry? Who was going to be the father on the other side? Who was going to be the husband on the other side? not as much attention was given. So now we need to bring back and say those boys took cues from both predominantly Western culture that is, outside of the framework of Islam, and then from some folks within the Muslim community who had both the Western influences perhaps that influenced them more, and their own misgivings and their own insecurities and their own personal mishaps. That's what was out there for display, without any place to process, without any place to say, this is not how things should be going. And we waited for crises to occur. And when that blew up, social media took over, and then it was like, oh my God, now what do we do? Right? We can't just, rewind all of this. But I'm praying that, inshallah, now we can say, whoever is 15, 16, 17, not too late. We're going to work on you. And whoever is 5, 6, and 7, we love you. We want to start working on you. And we will do this in as balanced way as possible so that we can meet up with you. And I'll just close with this. I know oftentimes when I give a lecture on marriage, I'm always nervous because I'm sure there's somebody in the audience who's going, oh my God, where were you? We got married 2 years ago, or we just had our kitab last weekend, and like, where were you guys with these reminders? So you never want to make someone regret. There's always a course correction that can be made, and that was the example of all of the companions, may Allah be pleased with them, who reverted to Islam so much later in life, who had so many issues, personal, familial, cultural, everything they could let go and rebrand, if you will, and come back to the minhaj and the message of Islam, inshallah.
Yeah, and I think, like, whoever says, I think I'd like to think that we've gotten to a point where people say, that if we focus on the women, then we're not focusing on the men, or if we focus on the men, then we're not focusing. At the end of the day, they both impact each other, and it's become that very reductive conversation of like, it's a competition between the two. It really isn't. When one does better, it helps the other do better, and vice versa. Like, they're not separate, and they're not like, they can't be isolated. That's not effective. And I hope we've gotten to that point.
I'm very glad that Dr. Altaf, following up, is you honestly and openly said it, and we have to say this more, is that yes, as a Western society, and Muslim communities have also followed in this. There was a lot of focus on the girls, and of course their lot has improved quite a bit in terms of from over the decades and the years. Through that focus, there's been a lot of benefit there. There's a lot of work to be done left, of course. That's why Nisa Foundation, or that's why there's so much work that you're doing with Nisa. But there is a neglect that was done to the boys, and it was almost expected that you're just going to figure out how all these changes are happening in society. And one thing I like is that in Raising Rijaal, and I'm sure also with your project with Yaqeen Institute, and it's very important because what happens is we've also often said to boys, how are you in relation to women alone, without focusing on boys themselves. And as a father of boys as well, I realized this, that we often in modernity almost only talk to men in relation to women. But what about just focusing on boys themselves? And yes, in ways that it may interact with women or other men, other communities in your own life. And I'm very happy that it was this foundation, this organization that said, you know what, it's not about always in relation to each other, but you have to be whole within yourself, that no matter what changes are happening in society, and changes are happening in terms of how modernity is taking different gender dynamics and these things, but there is a certain set of core values that boys need to be taught. And this was often done through mentorship and through observation in traditional societies. You didn't necessarily need to have Raising Rijaal, because there are, Rijaal all around you. As Yasmin said, like, you're just interacting with so many family members and so many other people. Whereas right now, when I really think about it, how many men do my boys actually interact with to actually observe them? It's almost none, because they're always at home. They're at school. They have female teachers. Maybe when they go over to someone's house, their family members, cousins, and uncles and aunts or grandparents live far away. So we don't have that village that is raising boys anymore, in which they see a large amount of healthy interaction, duty, responsibility. Of course, they are going to see bad as well, but it's supposed to be drowned out by the greater by the greater example, when that's combined with the Sunnah, when that's combined with this teachings of Islam and your scholars and other things, that's when you have a holistic view. But now we have this situation where you have pop culture, you've got the phone, and you've got maybe one or two male role models at best. And so this is why going through, for example, like sports coaches who can act as those role models, and trying to actually make programs where we supplement some of the things that they may not have caught in the society around them. I think it's a very important way of emphasizing that boys have to be educated to be into men of their own right, and not always in relation to someone else. Otherwise, they feel like they're always second fiddle. And some boys are feeling like they're second fiddle to girls. And that's not what Islam intends at all. So we have to show that, as you said, a course correction as a society, that as a community, that society may be going in one direction, but we're not going to leave our boys behind.
Yeah. And I think, again, I'll give you, Dr. Farah, I want to add to that we see this at Nisa homes, the number of boys that come with their moms and have no positive male role models, have no positive Muslim male role models. They might have other role models, and a lot of them will end up gravitating towards role models on social media that, again, we're going back to that same problem. They're just showing you what they want to show you. And a lot of that is even then harmful. But the reality is that even us, like trying to find them, well, okay, maybe my husband can go and be a role model. Like, I'm just trying to fill in that gap, because then they start, unfortunately, we've seen this with a lot of these boys, they have started to gravitate away from Islam, or say that, this is because of Islam, that we don't want to be like these Muslim men because we saw Muslim men as abusers or this or that. And it really, subhanAllah, it's so heartbreaking to see that play out without having an option to provide them. Sorry, that was just a side note. Dr. Farah.
No, Yasmin, you're right. When we talk about the crisis of masculinity that our young boys, our men are facing, subhanAllah, I was at one of this big, I guess, school fair, high school student school fair at one of the largest Muslim schools that we have, Islamic schools that we have here in the GTA. And I was going around, and one of the boys had this little post-it on his poster, and it said, "Andrew Tate is king." And I thought, just like what our shuyukh and Dr. Altaf, Sheikh Abdullah, what you're mentioning, this idea that boys are growing up in this vacuum, that they are desperate for role models, and in a place, or just looking in all the wrong places for role models that they can really latch onto, right? We do have beautiful prophetic examples. We have wonderful men doing incredible things within our community, but those are unfortunately not the role models that our boys and our young men are gravitating towards. I think too, when you're talking about the socio-political context and what's happened historically, when we use terms, for example, like toxic masculinity, I think what a lot of boys and young men are growing up now believing, when they're hearing words like that, I think it makes them believe that masculinity itself is toxic. That's become really hard for a young boy or a young man just trying to find his place, his role, his responsibility in this world, right? Everybody wants to find a purpose, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us a God-given purpose, and we want to be able to actualize that within our family, within our ummah, within our society. But this rhetoric of toxic masculinity makes boys feel like they don't have a place or a role in this world. But then what is he supposed to do? Spend his days, I don't know, video gaming, or, whatever, right? He can't find a way to feel productively valued in society when there's so much he's been given and so much he can give to his society, but he doesn't feel he has that space of belonging and acceptance. And for example, I found, at the university, it's sort of a worrying or a trend that maybe we can consider or talk about, but a lot of boys or young men in my class had changed their pronoun from being he to being a man to being all or any, right? There was a large trend. I think the majority of the boys in my class had actually done that. I hope it's okay for me to say this, but this idea that a lot of men are feeling like they don't have a space to be a man. So they have to adapt or to hide what makes them a man. They must hide it or put it away whether that's changing their gender pronoun, so they can be seen as not being toxic, not being seen as violent, or whatever it is. SubhanAllah. And what we obviously want to, I hope put forth, inshallah, is this idea that our masculinity, if you're a boy or a man, or our femininity, if you're a woman or a young girl, is something Allah gave us, and it's a beautiful gift. And there are beautiful roles and places or spaces of belonging and duties that you've been given. It's an incredible honor that you've been given from your Rabb, and to live up to that. And to offer those spaces of belonging and contribution, that you can really do that in a powerful way.
I think, like what you said, is that if I can offer an additional example, that I find that they turn to people like Andrew Tate, which kind of give that kind of incorrect understanding that it's like all or nothing, that you have like that the alpha male that has to be like 100% masculine, and that women have to be 100% feminine, and it's like it's black and white. Like there is, and we don't have these conversations. And I keep saying this, again, going back to the community, we don't have spaces where we talk about this, and where boys can talk about it and women can talk about it. As a mom of 2 boys, it's also something super scary for me, right? Like thinking about how can I make sure that I'm giving those spaces for my boys to be able to, yes, be men and be masculine, but at the same time be kind and be caring and be emotionally intelligent. It's those are not just women things. Those are things that should be as people, regardless of who we are. We have to emulate both of those. So I guess my question to that is, what can we go back to in the Sunnah that teaches us these things, like for these boys, and kind of to Dr. Altaf's point, like how can we course correct here? Where can we bring in the Islam, and more than just the conversations? What more can we do?
So Yasmin, if you don't mind, I just was going to add something. I realized that we'd focused a lot on the impact of Western culture and to some degree the external forces. The other part that I think it was either Sheikh Abdullah, Dr. Farah mentioned earlier about going online and looking for information. What we need to also be talking about is that in the vacuum of not having perhaps access to credible or legitimate scholarship, or at least in person, there could be misinterpretations or the adopting of somewhat extreme interpretations of the concept of qawam, like the idea that Rijaal, the men are caretakers, and what does that become, and how does that translate into daily life. So it may also mean that we do both. We do a deconstructing of existing thought processes and socialization forces, and then we do a nurturing of, within this model of an Islamic sort of mindset, of what it means to then be this responsible, upright, high character young man, young boy growing into a young man and an adult, using our Islamic references and sources. Because I think the misinterpretation and or the more the cliff notes, where I don't even know what the way of those similar notes are, but the point is that exactly, is that version of interpretation. I think that's also giving rise to learning Islam through just family hand-me-downs. So and so did it, and so did it, and nobody ever questioned why it's not appropriate for you to speak disrespectfully to your wife, your mother, your aunt, your whatever. And it's not just acceptable, because you had a rough day or a long day. And the person speaking, me, giving that reminder is, to myself first and foremost. So what happens, right? And we need to think through how can we make sure that we're also, deconstructing any mislearning that occurred of the tradition, and presenting the tradition in the best way possible. And I think it's not it's not unenviable task to do that, deconstructing the Western forces as well as deconstructing the misinterpretation of our own tradition, inshallah.
And I think that's where Yaqeen has been very helpful in that, like, a lot of the papers, I know it's something I refer to, at least, like, because as much as we want to be able to have access to ask those questions in real time, sometimes it's not possible. So still, like you said, having those opportunities and having that real or correct explanations is very, very important. Thank you for that. Yeah. I think I'm going to go back to my earlier question. I think maybe to kind of start wrapping up, just, well, can we talk about what are the real examples that we should be following when we talk about masculinity and boys and raising boys? What has the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba, what have they taught us when it comes to that?
Well, the Prophet ﷺ, he taught boys, men, certain teachings regarding controlling themselves and refining who they are. And this was not even in relation to women or relation to other people in their lives, like their parents, but it does end up having impact on those things. So the Prophet ﷺ taught us about anger. What makes, what does it mean to control our anger? What does it mean to be a strong person? Because boys naturally respect, strength in individuals. What does it mean to be strong? What's the most important thing in your religiosity? Is it outward markers of religiosity, or is it the idea of responsibility, the idea of good character? And so the idea of improving yourself first is something that the Prophet spoke about, and then showed people how to do it with vis-a-vis other people in their lives. So the Prophet saying the best of you is best to his family. And then he said, and I am the best to my family. And so this is something for all of us to aspire to. Me, first and foremost, is that the Prophet ﷺ, he pointed to himself as the ideal exemplar and said, if you want to be the best person in your community, your society, in your time, then be like me in the way I treat my family. And then the Prophet ﷺ, in the rest of his life, sometimes saying it and sometimes not even saying it, would show the way to be the best to your family, whether it's the way he treated his daughters and the way he rose up to greet Fatima when she came inside a room, hug her, kiss her, take her by the hand, put her in the spot that he was sitting, things that you would not expect typically necessarily of fatherhood in a traditional context, even in an even traditional Muslim context, that's done in public. Dr. Altaf mentioned earlier in the podcast, the Prophet ﷺ walking hand in hand with his wife Safiya and pointing out, this is Innaha Safiya, this is Safiya. Now, usually in cultures, we often don't even take the name of our wives, let alone, he's not introducing, but he is pointing out, look, I'm with my wife. This is who my wife is. This is her identity. This is who she is. Rather than feeling like he has to hide her away, for example. So there are aspects of being strong and proud to be a man, but that entailing a lot of benevolence, a lot of respect, and then being manly becomes something that is respected by everybody. It sweetens the entire community when you have men who behave like that, and that makes it a good name for masculinity. And the whole problem has become that when we divorce the sunnah from masculinity, that is what toxic masculinity is. That's really what toxic masculinity is. When you take the Prophet out of, because he's called Insan al-Kamil. He's the perfect human being. He is the exemplar, the paragon in every single virtue, but also the fact that Allah made him a man shows us how to do that. And when we take that out, that's when you get toxic masculinity, whether or not society calls it that, right? Society's view of masculinity is toxic to us if the prophetic nature is not inside that. And so the sunnah has to become the basis for how we teach our boys to become men.
I wanted to give a book recommendation, Futuwa by, mashallah, by our brother Dawood Walid, mashallah, fantastic. In terms of this idea of this need for reviving chivalry amongst our boys, amongst our men, the idea of honor, of duty, of responsibility, and how beautiful that is in terms of what role it gives to men and to boys in our society. So he has a wonderful outline, for example, a couple of action points that we can do in our communities. What do we do to raise great boys, great men, inshallah, to be the leaders of our ummah? So, for example, he talks about this idea that we need for boys and for young men to have circles of teaching and of learning from that idea of having elders in the community that they can look up to, that they can learn from, and also this idea that they pay it forward as young boys or young teens, they also offer that scaffolding and that mentorship to other young boys to be that place of belonging, as well as this idea that it's really important for young boys to be able to go through life and have a sense of efficacy. So whether that's, for example, something like karate, where you go through the belt system, you gain some certain skills, you achieve a certain level of mastery, and then you move up and you move up, and it just makes a young man feel this sort of sense of confidence, of efficacy, of just feeling like they've accomplished something. That's something oftentimes missing in the ways our societies have been built, especially prolonged adolescence, all kinds of things, and not putting real responsibilities on our young people where they feel like they're contributing to something greater, to a greater whole, and having that meaning that they're so desperate for in life, honestly. And the idea also of having physical activities or group physical activities where they can actually meet other wonderful peers or young men their age and be able to bond in a way that's actually meaningful, right? Beyond talking about, I don't know, very surface level sports or this or that, but actually having real deep conversations about faith, about deen, about their hopes, their dreams in life, what they want to be when they, inshallah, be fathers one day, all those great things, and having those deep conversations. So our masajid can get involved, sponsoring or having i'tikaf or, sleepovers for boys in the masjid or outdoor camping kinds of activities where the imam or other great youth leaders in the masjid take out some of the boys for chopping wood or just doing all those great skills, it's just such a wonderful way for men and boys to be able to bond with each other, learn from each other, teach each other, grow and nurture each other in that way. And just provide that idea of chivalry, of what it means to be a man, is to be strong and courageous and to stand up for what is right. And how to now.
I'm just going to say that this is what our Raising Rijaal program is. It's literally tying in sports with character building and healthy relationships. So it's working with the coaches of sports teams to have the coaches teach the boys these topics, or have these conversations. Sorry, not teach them. It really is about conversations, because we find that, like you said, sports in and of themselves teach so much, and then when you're able to tie in, it's already paved the path for extra beneficial knowledge to come through. So yeah, that makes me excited to hear that.
Just wanted to add to that, and I'm looking forward to, by the way, the rollout of that program. Is that one of the challenges we've had is that sometimes the youth, and when I've been in different youth camps and and so forth, they find the distance is too great between the prophetic time period and them currently. And so I think, to add to what both Dr. Farah and Sheikh Abdullah have already mentioned, the base is definitely that. And I think what I've been trying to do is to say, okay, now let's look to see what are some examples of people that are publicly accessible within the realm of the sort of the conference and convention scene, and really, like Dr. Jamal Badawi I mentioned earlier, Hafidhullah, 50 years of service to the community, not a blemish that anybody can say, this was a scandal or this happened. Dr. Imam Siraj Wahaj, Hafidhullah, Dr. Muhammad Yunus from the Islamic Circle of North America, early pioneer founders. So that if we do sort of ranges, then you come, and I intentionally, by the way, I mentioned an Arab, a South Asian, an African American, and you can, add into like a white American, Hispanic American, whatever it is that the demographic we're dealing with, to show reachability, that it is doable, it is possible. And one of the prophetic things I find, most helpful is when we read the different, hadith, there's someone being praised. It's a public exercise, for such and such behavior. Bilal radiallahu ta'ala anhu, what is it that you do? I heard your footsteps in Jannah, and so then it becomes okay, tell me, what do you do, right? Tell me your habits. So we could be scouting for young men who are just into high school, if we're dealing with, let's say, the preteens and early teens, then scouting for young men who are just into college, for those who are in high school, so that we show them one step of where it's working. And of course, that takes a lot of diligence, a lot of research. We want to make sure, there's like what we perceive is the reality of this person that we're modeling, or that we're propping up, and not doing it artificially, but doing it just in a very organic way. Thanking someone. Oh, thank you so much. That was really polite how you dealt with so and so, and then everyone hears it and then look and they go, oh wow, okay, that's interesting. That means being polite, and that means being modest, and that means being compassionate. That means bringing into life, if you will, reifying these sort of characteristics that we want them to emulate. So I think we need to do the base remains the base, then exemplify, use all of those amazing characters in our history, and then keep bringing it one step closer, inshallah, so that they can actually see and say, oh, okay, I see that it is doable. I see that, inshallah, I can strive to be like so and so that they mentioned.
That's a great point. That making it real and tangible, and not this, even the idea of the Prophet ﷺ, well, he was the Prophet. We're not the Prophet. Well, there are other examples beyond just the Prophet or the Sahaba. So I think that's these are all very phenomenal points. I'm so excited about just these conversations happening in our spaces. I think, again, I know it's kind of selfish of me, but because I have boys, it is something I worry about. But I do see it obviously impacting our community and our society, and the women that we serve, and it's something that, inshallah, I believe by having these conversations and these programs, we can start to prevent, inshallah. So I think we can wrap up. I think pretty much all my questions were answered. So I think we can wrap up with any final points or any final reflections, any words that you would like to end off this conversation on. And I know that we could probably have much more to say, but I'm being mindful of everyone's.
Nisa Foundation and everyone else who is listening to this and came to this sort of idea of helping our young men, young boys, and even our young girls and young women, because it is really truly a noble endeavor that we need to be more systematic, more strategic, more focused, more intentional about raising the next generation. And to the extent that we are all concerned about the successful intergenerational transfer of faith, I think this is where it starts, because the components of faith, as exemplified in the character of these young people, inshallah, they will be, and I do say, today's youth, tomorrow's community. I don't say tomorrow's leaders. I say tomorrow's community. And then if Allah gives you the opportunity to serve, yes, you will serve in different ways, but just focus on being a contributing, upright citizen of any community in which you are. And so thank you to Nisa Foundation and for developing this program, and may Allah bring much benefit from it, put much barakah in it, inshallah.
Inshallah. Alhamdulillah. Ameen, inshallah.
I'd also like to thank Nisa Foundation for the fact that even though the foundation is named after women and focuses a lot on women issues, they realize that we're all in this together, and they're focusing on a project that's called Raising Rijaal. And it's not a men's foundation, or like, it wasn't thought of initially by men, but you've involved, other men in the community, alhamdulillah, and including myself. And we realize that this is not something that even, I'll just, just for the general public who's watching this, not because this is not like, oh, Nisa Foundation is doing this, so this is like women trying to do something on these boys or men exclusively. It's all of our roles. And anyone who's watching this, whether you're a man or a woman, should get involved in this. And it's a very, very important next step, because as you said, some of us have sons, so we have this kind of extra concern. But if you have daughters, you also have that concern, because you want them to marry good men. And even if you don't have kids, you still have the concern, because the community is about our youth today, is tomorrow's community, as Dr. Altaf said. And so this is in the interest of everyone, just like how we want the faith to be passed on from generation to generation to generation. The identities of the human beings, the soundness of their psyches and the wholeness of their spirituality and the relationships that they have is just as important as a carrier of religion as is teaching them the Quran and the Sunnah. It all goes hand in hand. So I do want to thank Nisa Foundation, everyone else who's joined today, and for allowing me to come here as well to brainstorm on, I think, what's going to be, inshallah, groundbreaking efforts to help the boys in our community become men. Inshallah.
Inshallah, inshallah. I can say that the response from the community has been phenomenal. Like everyone is just, this is what we need. Yes, like I need this for my boys. I need this for my husband, my community. I think we, you know, like we mentioned earlier, I think there is becoming a shift in that approach and in that understanding that, hey, you know, let's start looking at other ways that we can address these issues, and let's really start talking to our boys. Let's really start giving them the attention that they need and deserve.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Farah, please don't thank us also, please.
Oh my gosh, no, that was beautifully said, Sheikh Abdullah and Dr. Altaf. I don't even know what to add to that, mashallah. I mean, to say I'm so excited about raising Rijaal as well, not only as a mother to a son, but understanding that we all have a responsibility and a role to play in creating and nurturing our ummah, inshallah, for the next generations. And yes, as mothers, we have an incredible role here to raise our sons as strong, beautiful, courageous, nurturing men who are going to go on to be, inshallah, we pray, to be great husbands, to be great fathers, to be great brothers, to be great sons, to be great leaders, and part and parcel of this ummah. Right? We're all here to work to create that community. And, you know, may Allah bless all of you for taking part in this and being a part of this conversation. These are those difficult, uncomfortable conversations that we do need to have. And inshallah, I really do pray that Allah puts immense barakah into this initiative, that we can work together, learn together, and grow together, so we can create a thriving, beautiful Muslim community and ummah.
Inshallah.
Jazakumullah khair. It's a wonderful note to end off on. Alhamdulillah.